بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك وعلى أهل بيتك الطيبين الطاهرين. صلى الله عليك يا مولاي وابن مولاي، يا غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء. فاز من اعتصم بحبلكم، أمن من لجأ إلى حصنكم. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي، فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. صلى الإله ومن يحف بعرشه، والطيبون على المبارك أحمد. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. نورنا ضاء على البرية كلها، من يهدى للنور المبارك يهتدي. حق لعيني ألا تنام كأنما كحلت مآقيلها بكحل الأرمد. آليت أني ما سمعت بميت، إلا بكيت على النبي وآله. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله. صلى الله عليك يا حبيب الله. When we want to look into a community, we first and foremost look into the originator of said community. For example, when we want to take the Afghani community for an example, or the Iraqi community, or the Iranian community, the Persian community, we cannot associate that community to a specific individual, right? Yani when we want to look at the Afghani community, who was the first Afghani? There is no such thing. When we want to look at the Iraqi community, who was the first Iraqi? There is no such thing. But then there are communities who have a specific originator, such as when we want to say the Christian community. Well, the Christian community are the followers of Jesus Christ, son of Mary, salamullahi alayhi. There is a differentiation between these two communities. That differentiation falls in between what? In between the origin and the methodology. For example, when we want to talk about the Afghani community, do we have Afghanis here today? Yeah? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. What is the Afghani community known for throughout history? Who knows? The Afghani community was known for the fact that they were not conquerable. Nobody could conquer them. Rather, they used to call Afghanistan, they used to call it the graveyard of civilizations, the graveyard of empires. Why, Maulana? Because any emperor who dares to try to conquer Afghanistan would end. It would end there, whether it be Alexander the Macedonian, whether it be anywhere else. In fact, even the British Empire, they wrote poems about how the fact that when they entered Afghanistan, their expand halted. Hassan wasn't halted in 100%, but they were the hardest people to conquer. That comes from what? That's not because of theology, that's because of a cultural effect. But then when you want to conquer a people, you can conquer a people in one of two methods. One by the sword, and one by the concept of belief. Or, let's not say belief, you can conquer them socially. We find that Islam is not a religion that wants to conquer by the sword. Now, did it happen? It happened, absolutely. After the passing of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Khalifa that came after him, the emperors, the kings that came after the Prophet, spread Islam by the way of the sword. When we come to the Ahlul Bayt, when we reflect upon this, the Ahlul Bayt say this is not our way. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never started a war. All of his wars were defensive. He never carried the sword and went and attacked a people. Now, in modern history, some historians, they say, well, no, he had some scrimmages and all of that. Maulana, there was never, not one instance of the Prophet attacking. That's number one. Number two is when the Prophet wanted to conquer a people, he conquered them how? Intellectually. The Prophet sent a message to whom? Kisra, Azimul Furs. Kisra is a title given to whom? To the emperor of the Persians, like Caesar. Okay, the word Caesar refers to who? The emperor of the Roman Empire. They are called Caesar. Of course, Caesar is the name. By the way, Caesar is the name of Julius Caesar, but after him, every emperor was called Caesar. Augustus Caesar, whoever Caesar. Caesar became a title after him. Kisra was likewise. Kisra became a title that the Arabs used to refer to the emperor of the Persians. What did the Prophet send to him? The Prophet sent him a letter. The letter says, "Min Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi ya Sayyidi ya Rasulullah wa ala ahli baytik." Min Muhammad Rasulullah ila Kisra Azim al-Furs Aslim Taslim يأتيك الله أجرك مرتين. From Muhammad, the messenger of Allah, to Kisra, the emperor of the Persians. Submit to Allah, Allah will reward you twice for your submission. He sent a similar letter to whom? To the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, which is called Rome. We refer to it today as the Byzantine Empire or the Eastern Roman Empire, but at that time they referred to it as Rome. Same thing. And he sent another one to the Coptic Empire, which is in modern day Egypt. Maulana, that was the path of the Prophet and the path of Ahlul Bayt. Where do we find this path? We find that when we look into the Quran. What does the Quran say? وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. O Muhammad, you hold the highest of morals. Ya Muhammad, you have the highest of morals. That is why, what does he say? He says, أَدَّبَنِي رَبِّي فَأَحْسَنَ أَدَبِي. I have been taught by my Lord mannerisms and morals. Then he says, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمِ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I have been sent to complete the mannerisms of mankind. Now there is something we have to realize. Time has passed. 1400 years have passed. What we assume changes morally, in reality is stable. Because our morality might change dictating upon the place where we live. A prime example, a few hundred years ago, a woman in her 16th was considered at the age of marriage, right? Today, a woman in her 30s might still not be able to get married, right? Or doesn't feel ready to get married. That right there is not a moral issue. That is a social issue. Because when we look at morality, how do we dictate morality? Who can dictate what morality is? If morality is something that is fluid, that we can say this is right and this is wrong, then how do you conceive the concept of incest being immoral? Right? Because what do they say today? Love is love, right? Love is love. Well, why is love when it comes to something? Love is love when it's not love. Love is not love when it comes to incest. If you're claiming that morality is fluid, why was it 10 years ago we didn't accept certain things, and today we're forced to accept them? And we know that within our hearts is unacceptable, right? What does the Quran say? وَلَيْسَ الذَّكَرُ كَالْأُنْثَى. Men are not like women. But you force me to accept it. You're making me accept it. Is that moral or is that social? Say, La Maulana, that's social. Morality must be handed by he who has an elevation and an understanding of that. And to us, we say that comes from the Almighty, from Allah. You bring atheists, people like Richard Dawkins, who say, no, I disagree. Maulana, they want to disagree, let them disagree. Everybody takes their own path. At the end of the day, nobody's going to lay in my grave other than I. So let me lay in my grave how I feel, how I see it fit to live my life. You don't have the right to force me to believe in what you want to believe. There is no reason why I should submit to your ideology, nor can I accept you or expect you to submit to my ideology. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, when he was exiled to the Shu'ab of Bani Talib, and the people of Yathrib of Medina, when they came to him, they said, Ya Muhammad, we want to invite you to come to Medina. You have solved an issue between Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj that lasted for 250 years. We want you to be our host. What were the conditions that the Prophet gave? He says, I will come, but under no force over anybody. Nobody will be forced to accept Islam, and nobody shall be forced to leave Islam. Maulana, the Prophet wasn't in a position to argue or to demand. The Prophet was in exile, him and his family. His uncle and his wife died because of the exile, because of the poor conditions of the exile. But he put stipulations. Why? Because he had a goal, which is his moral goal, to serve the people. When Quraysh came to Abu Talib radwanullahi alayhi, and they said, Ya Abu Talib, what does Muhammad want? He wants to be the richest, we will make him the richest. He wants to have the highest status, we will give him the highest status. He wants to have favor over us, we will give him the keys to make the Kaaba. What does he want? If he wants to be the best of us, we will give him the leadership. What does he want? What does he say? Abu Talib says, Ya Rasulullah, you heard what they said. He says, Ya Ammu, if they were to place the moon in my right and the sun in my left, that I should leave this message, I will not leave unless Allah gives me permission or I die. Then what did they say? They said, Ya Abu Talib, you say that he is your cousin or that he is your nephew. We will give you one of the best lads of all Mecca. Abandon him. You see the morality that the Prophet was fighting against? What did they say? If your connection to Muhammad is that he is your nephew, we will give you one of our sons, the best of our sons. Leave him be. What did he say to them? He says, you did not treat me fairly. You want me to give you my son to kill and to take your son to raise? That is the ideology that the Prophet faced. Salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. The Prophet faced an ideology where the people used to bury their daughters in fear that in the future they might become promiscuous. There is a narration that is narrated where a man came to the Prophet. The Quran says, وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. And when she, the daughter who was buried alive, is questioned on the day of judgment, why was she buried alive? Why was she killed? Here we should take pause. Why would Allah question the victim? Why wouldn't Allah question the criminal? يعني ليش الله يسأل الموعودة؟ ليش ما يسأل الوائد? You understand what I mean? Why is Allah questioning the victim? She's an infant and a child and a victim. Why does Allah question her? The scholars say because the individual, the criminal who committed the act, isn't worthy of being addressed. This individual is such an animal, such base in their life form, they're no longer worthy of being questioned. يعني وكأنما, in Arabic if I want to say it, كأنما هذا ما يستاهل واحد يسأله. The Prophet, this man comes to the Prophet and he says proudly, he says, Ya Rasulullah, I have buried 14 daughters. They say the Prophet started weeping. He says, Ya Rasulullah, none of them I was affected by except for the last one. The Prophet says, tell me the story. What happened? He says, Ya Rasulullah, when the wife was pregnant, I went on a trip. And back then a trip takes 6, 7, 8, a year, 2 years, depends. He says, I went on a trip. When I came back from the trip, when I went on the trip, my wife was pregnant. When I came back, I saw that she had no baby. So I said to her, what happened to the child, to the pregnancy? She said the pregnancy failed. It was a miscarriage. He says, Ya Rasulullah, for 4 years after that, I had no more babies. One day, my wife comes and she brings a 4-year-old daughter. For those who have a 4-year-old daughter, they know how beautiful that child is. Wallahi wa billahi wa tallah, a daughter in the house fills the house with love and joy and happiness. If you want to know love, you will not know love unless you have a daughter. Not your mother, not your daughter, not your mother, not your wife, not your sister. You want to know unconditional love? Look at your daughter. Your daughter loves you unconditionally until she becomes a teenager, then it changes. But up until she's a teenager, she loves you unconditionally. You are the world in her eyes. He says this 4-year-old daughter was playing around and she was beautiful. She filled the house with joy and laughter. So I asked my wife, whose daughter is this? She says, this is my brother's daughter. Meaning what? Meaning her niece, right? He says she stayed with us for a week, for 2 weeks, for a long time. Then when I asked her, I says, why doesn't your brother come and take his child? She says, this is not my niece. This is your daughter. I feared that when you returned from your trip 4 years ago that you would kill her. So I sent her to live with my brothers. Maulana, this whole time the Prophet is weeping. They say he wept until his beard was drenched in his tears. He says, when I heard that, I did not show my wife that I was upset or angry. But what did I do? He says, I convinced my wife that I want to take her to the market with me. He says, I took this 4-year-old child. I took her away from her mother. I dug a grave for her. He says, as I'm digging the grave, this child comes to my beard and brushes the sand away from the dirt and the sand away from my beard. He says, and I look at her with anger, with a stone cold heart. He says, then I placed her in the grave and she says to me, Baba, why do you do what you want to do? What do you want to do? He says, as the sand got close to her throat, she looked and she says, Baba, don't tell my mother what happens to me. He's saying this and the Prophet is shedding his tears. Then the Prophet looks at him and he says, what stone cold of a heart do you have? To that effect, the Quran says that they have hearts kal hijara, like stone. Bal ashaddu qaswa, rather their hearts are colder and harder than a stone. We see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi has one daughter. That daughter, when she enters, he used to stand up and greet her for her majesty. They used to say when Fatima alayha salam used to enter, he would stand and look in her face. That when she would sleep, he would sleep and look at her face. Maulana, the Prophet lived in a society of that caliber. A society that did not value their own daughters. How much pain do you think the Prophet suffered? A society that used to, just a quick recap. Sayyidah Fatima alayha salatu wasalam in her khutbah al-fadakiyah, she reminds them of who they are. She says to them, وَكُنْتُمْ عَلَى شَفَى حُفْرَةٍ مِّنَ النَّارِ قَبْسَةَ الْعَجْلَانِ وَمَوْضِعَ الرِّكَابِ. She says you were at the edge of a pit of a fire, or at the edge of a pit of a fire pit, at the edge of a fire pit. You were worried that you would be grasped by anyone who comes in rush. You were bottom feeders, you were the base. أذلة خاسئين تخافون أن يتخطفكم الناس من بين أظهركم فأنار الله بأبي محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. You were base, you feared each other, you lived in constant fear. تشربون الطرق وتقتاتون القد والورق. Maulana, they used to dig, for those who were not Bedouins, what they used to do, they used to dig wells. Those wells they would drink from, their animals would drink from. They would sacrifice their animals into this well. The feces and the urine of the animals would be in that well. She says, used to drink that water. وَتَقْتَاتُونَ الْقِدْ. They used to take the non-digestible intestines of the animal. They would hammer it and dry it out and they would chew on it. They couldn't eat it. It's not like jerky today where you would dry out meat. No, it was intestines. And they would chew on it from the hunger. وَالْوَرَقْ. Desert plants that cannot be eaten, that the animals wouldn't eat. The Prophet took you from this. Then she says, بَعْدَ الَّتَيَّا وَالَّتِي. After all of this, you would trade, you would turn your back on me? Subhanallah, ya Allah, how quick is it that you forget? She says, وَالرَّسُولُ لَمَّا يُقْبَرْ. The Prophet hasn't been buried yet. ابتدارا زعمتم خوف الفتنة. The Prophet hasn't been buried. You rush saying, oh, we fear that there would be a fitna within the people. ألا في الفتنة شططوا وإن جهنم لمحيطة بالكافرين. So we see that the Prophet took these people and elevated them. How, Maulana? Intellectually. And that is our main focus. The focus is, how does the Prophet, or who is the Prophet? Sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. What is the status of the Prophet? Allah in the Quran say, before I begin, Sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allah in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse 7, He says, وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ مِيثَاقَهُمْ وَمِنْكَ وَمِنْ نُوحٍ وَإِبْرَاهِيمَ وَمُوسَى وَعِيسَى ابْنَ مَرْيَمَ وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْهُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. Allah in this verse says, He says, and we took from all the prophets an oath, and from you, and from Nuh, Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa ibn Maryam, and we took from them a solemn oath. Here we find a number of things. Number one is, what is that mithaq? What is that oath or the covenant that Allah, let's not covenant, let's say an oath, that Allah took from those prophets? In another verse, what does the Quran say? أَلَمْ أَعْهَدْ إِلَيْكُمْ يَا بَنِي آدَمَ شنو؟ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا الشَّيْطَانِ وَأَنْ اعْبُدُونِي. وفي آية أخرى يقول وَأَقْرَرْتُمْ. And you, did I not take an oath from you, O sons of Adam, do not worship the shaitan and worship me? And you accepted. Maulana Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhi. Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari comes to the Prophet and he says to him, Ya Rasulullah, why are you you? Why out of all creation are you the final messenger? Why are you Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. That's a very good question, huh? Yani why does Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi become Muhammad and I'm not? It's a very good question. The Prophet says to him, Ya Jabir, when Allah created creation and He took the oath upon creation, I was the first individual to answer Bala. لما أخذ الله الميثاق على الخلق أنا أول من أجاب ربي. I am the first to answer. So you're going to ask, well, why was he the first to answer? Because of his capability and readiness. Maulana, everybody on existence has a level of capability and readiness that suits their being, that suits their spirituality. It is clear throughout the board, but one rushes to it, such as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then Amirul Mu'mineen, and then the Ahlul Bayt, and then the rest of the prophets. And I know now you're going to ask me, are you saying that Amirul Mu'mineen is better than the prophets? Bala, Mawlai. Ali ibn Abi Talib comes right after the Prophet. أنا وعلي من شجرة واحدة وسائر الناس من شجر شتى. Me and Ali come from the same tree, from the same root, from the same soil, and the rest of mankind come from different trees. By that association, by that narration, Ali is better than the Anbiya, all of the Anbiya. As I know what you're going to say, but the Anbiya receive a wahi. Maulana, absolutely. Ali ibn Abi Talib does not receive a wahi. Ali ibn Abi Talib is not a prophet. Ali ibn Abi Talib is the second in command for the final prophet. By association, he's better than everybody else. By association, the second in command of the best is better than everyone else. You guys with me or not? The Vice President of the United States of America has more authority than the President of many, if not all, other countries on earth. Right or not? Why? Because of the liberties and the capabilities that he enjoys. Sahih or not? Not the President. The Vice President of America has more capability and more at his disposal than any other, if not any, than most, if not all, other countries on earth. Because of the wealth, of the capability, of the country that he's from, he has more at his disposal. Ali ibn Abi Talib is the vice president to Islam as a general religion. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi is Khatam al-Anbiya wal-Mursaleen, right? The Quran says, and to each of the prophets we created what? We gave what? Shar'a wa minhaja. Right? شنو يعني شرع ومنهاج؟ يعني Allah and a methodology. Then what does Allah then say? He says, وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. Right? إِنَّ الدِّينَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ الْإِسْلَامِ. So there is only one religion to Allah, right? But then when he talks about the other prophets, what does he say? He says, and we gave each one of them laws. Sharia means what? Means laws. Waminhaj means sunnah, methodology. If they all have laws and methodology, but when it comes to the Prophet, what does he have? He has the whole religion. In other words, Ibrahim, Nuh has laws and methodologies. When Ibrahim came after Nuh, he had the laws and methodology of Ibrahim and more, right? And he added to it. Musa had the laws and methodologies of Ibrahim, Nuh, and more. Isa had the methodology and the laws of Nuh, Ibrahim, Musa, and more. Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi had all of Islam. Therefore, he who is his second in command has what? Has all the methodologies and the laws of everyone before him until the end. Brothers and sisters, is that concept clear? So let nobody come and ask, is Ali ibn Abi Talib better or not? Maulana Ali ibn Abi Talib comes right after the Prophet, and everybody else comes afterwards. Let's go back to our verse. وَإِذَا أَخَذْنَا مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ مِيثَاقَهُمْ وَمِنْكَ. And from you. We took an oath from all the prophets. And from you. ومن نوح وإبراهيم وموسى وعيسى ابن مريم وأخذنا منهم ميثاقا غليظا. We took an oath from you, and from Nuh, Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa, son of Mary. And we took from them a solemn oath. That solemn oath is what made them Anbiya ulil Azm, the prophets of grand determination. There is no issue here. Where does the point of reference lie? It lies with the concept that Allah refers to Nuh, Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa chronologically. Meaning what? Meaning by time. Nuh was before Ibrahim, Ibrahim was before Musa, Musa was before Isa. But when he refers to the Prophet, where does he place him? Ahead of them. He says, وَمِنْكَ وَمِن نُوحٍ. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Placing him first. Why? Placing him first for a multitude of reasons. Reason number one is he has a complete revelation. He has a complete Islam. Number two is that he is the seal of all prophecies. Number three is that he, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, has favor upon all of them. Number four is that he accepted before everybody else that oath. And finally is that he, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, is the reason for creation. What does our narration say? Were it not for Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, God would have not created anything in existence. Now, some would say, Shaykhna, that's too much. Why would Allah create everything in existence for 1 or 5 individuals? What would be the reason for that? Please excuse me if I take a bit longer today. It's the final day, it's the martyrdom of the Prophet. I ask you for your patience. Are you guys okay with that? Sallallahu ala Muhammad. Why would Allah create everything for 5 individuals? Maulana, what is the value of something if it not for the eye of the beholder? Isn't that what we say? Beauty is what? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Sah wala la? If all of existence agrees that a diamond is no more than a regular rock and its value is nothing, would it be worth anything? I'll give you a better example. Turquoise. Turquoise is an in value, is a low in value stone, right? Turquoise in North America, ما أدري إيش قد هنا turquoise الأمريكي. Cheap, right? In comparison to other stones, it's rather cheap. But bring me an Aishaburi stone. Because we, in the Arabic culture and the Shi'i culture, assigned a value to it through the Ahlul Bayt, it's extremely expensive. Sah wala la? Aqiq is an inexpensive stone, but aqiq can reach thousands of dollars in Arabia. It won't here. Over here, if you want to sell your aqiq here, it won't reach $50, $60. Go to Iraq, Maulana, $600, $700 more. Why? Because the individuals assigned a value to it. I remember there's a physicist by the name of something Cox, something like that. He says one of the biggest tragedies is that we might destroy ourselves within the universe. The gist of what he says. Why? Because he says the beauty of the universe is only beautiful if there is someone intelligent enough to recognize its beauty. You guys understand what I'm saying? Beauty is only beautiful if somebody recognizes it. Now sometimes the humanity collectively recognizes the beauty of the universe. Great. But we do not recognize the beauty of creation the way that Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad recognized the beauty of creation. Why, Maulana? Because their level of elevation is higher than ours. For example, what do we see? We see the world around us. If we're blessed, we might feel the spiritual world. We might be spiritual individuals, right? What about Ali ibn Abi Talib? What does he say? He says, Wallahi law kushifa liya al-ghita' mazdadtu yaqina. He has achieved such a high elevation. He says, if the veil was removed from my sight, it would not increase me in faith or certainty. So when Allah creates what? Allah says, in the Hadith al-Qudsi, the narration says, I was a gem, a hidden gem, so I wanted to be known. Hence I created creation. So it is only through us that beauty in the universe is established. And the best of us finds more beauty than anything else. That's one. Therefore, when we come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi, when we see in his final days, what was his concern? Maulana, he comes to his companions surround him. By the way, what day did the Prophet die? On a Monday. On the Thursday previous to the Monday, he sits with his companions. His companions surround him. He had prepared an army out of the Medina. Okay, on what day? On the 26th, I believe, or on the 25th of Safar, he prepared an army for the Jaysh Osama. And he says, he who abandons the army of Osama is damned and condemned. A lot of the Sahaba abandon it in fear for the Prophet, they say. Hope they disobeyed the Prophet. On the Thursday evening, the Prophet is sitting with his companions and his Ahlul Bayt in the general sense. So he says to them, give me a paper and parchment. Give me parchment and a pen. Let me write for you a word. You will never be lost after this word. Maulana, what does one of them say? He says, Innahu yahjar. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. He says, leave him. He has lost his senses. He is overcome with pain. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So they began to argue. When they began to argue, the Prophet looked at them and he says, get up, leave me. It is not fit for you to argue, to fight in front of a Prophet. I am in a much better status than you claim for me. Leave me be. Maulana, that was the last time they saw the Prophet. Anybody who tells you otherwise have to come up with proof. However, on the night prior to the Prophet's death, sallallahu alayhi wa ala, sallallahu alayka sayyidi ya Rasulullah, Amir al-Mu'mineen narrates, bi abi wa ummi. He says that on that night, the Prophet called upon us. He says, he called upon us and he asked that the door be closed. وَأَغْلَقَ عَلَيْهِ وَعَلَيْهِمُ الْبَابِ وَقَالَ يَا فَاطِمَةَ إِدْنُ مِنِّي. He says, oh Fatima, come close to me. فَنَاجَاهَا مِنَ اللَّيْلِ طَوِيلًا. He stayed with her a long time during the night. فَلَمَّا طَالَ ذَلِكَ خَرَجْتُ وَمَعِيَ الْحَسَنُ وَالْحُسَيْنِ. He says, I left her and him alone. It's her final days with her father, her final hours. And we stood at the door of the Prophet's room. And some of the women asked, Ya Ali, what brought you outside? Why is Fatima there with her father alone? The Imam looks at her and he says, for the reason you and I both know. Maulana, he says, it wasn't but a few moments until Fatima called upon him and he returned. When he returned, Maulana, the Imam sat behind the Prophet. He let the Prophet lean on his chest. Fatima is on the chest of the Prophet. And Ali and Hassan and Hussein are at the feet of the Prophet. Then the Amir starts to cry. When the Imam starts to weep, the Prophet, he says to him, Ya Ali, this is no longer the time for you to cry. Oh Ali, this is the time for wida, Ya Ali. I will go to my Lord. Ya Ali, you do not cry. I am the one that cry for what will befall her and what will befall you after me. Maulana, then he starts telling the Imam of what would happen. In a narration, they say that the Prophet tells Ali ibn Abi Talib, Ya Ali, your right will be taken from you. Will you be patient? He says, Bala Sayyidi. Ya Ali, your right will be taken from you. Will you show patience? He says, Bala Sayyidi. Ya Ali, they will attack you. Will you be patient? He says, Bala Sayyidi. Ya Ali, they will give you nothing. Will you be patient? He says, Bala Sayyidi. Then he says, Ya Ali, and know that Fatima will be hit. Will you be patient? Maulana, they say here, Amir al-Mu'mineen ta'ta'a bi ra'sihi ila al-ard. He lowered his head. He did not answer. Then he looked and he says, Ya Rasulullah, awa tudrab Fatima. Will Fatima be struck? Qala bala ya Ali. And you must be patient, so Ali. Maulana, that's why the Imam was patient. Innama huwa ahdun ma'hud. However, when the Prophet died, what happened after the Prophet died? We see Fatima alayhi salam. Maulana, the Prophet's death is one tragedy. The fact that he was not buried by the companions is another tragedy. But the greatest tragedy is the tragedy of Fatima alayhi salam. When she used to go and sit by the grave of her father underneath the shade of an oak tree. They came to Ali. They said, Ya Ali, قل لفاطمة إما أن تبكي ليلها أو نهارها. Tell Fatima to either cry her days or her nights. Ya Ali, we can't stand hearing her weep. Then they came to the tree and they cut the tree down. Hence Amir al-Mu'mineen was forced to do what? To build a hut for her outside of the Medina. He called it the House of Sorrows. She used to take Hassan and Hussein to that area and cry her days over there and return to her home at night until what happened. Until they attacked, until they entered the house. To that effect, Sulaim, he says, قال سليم قلت يا سلمان وهل هجم القوم ولم يك استئذان. Sulaim, he asks Salman al-Muhammadi, he says, oh Salman, did they attack the house without having the right to? فقال إي وعزة الجبار وما كان على الزهراء من خباري فمذ رأوها عصروها عصر كادت تذوب بنفسي حسرة فأسقطت بنت الهدى وحزنا جنينها ذاك المسمى محسنا. He says, yes, they attacked, yes, they entered the house. Maulana, however, Sayyidah Fatima, when she heard that she would not receive FedEx, she went to them. She asked for her rights. They would not give her her right. That's why they say she turned, as she was standing there, she turned to the grave of the Prophet and she says, ماذا على من شم تربة أحمد ألا يشم مدى الزمان غواليا صبت علي مصائب لو أنها صبت على الأيام صرنا لياليا قد كان لي حما بظل محمد لا أسمع ضيما وكان جماليا فاليوم أخضع للذليل وأتقي ضيمي بيدي وأدفع ظالمي بردائيا لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Maulana, all that while Imam al-Hussein, while Imam al-Hassan watch, all of that while Amir al-Mu'mineen watches. That's why the poet he says شي يصير أبو الحسنين صبرا. والله شي يصير أبو الحسنين صبرا مدري على عياله يدير فكرة يوعى الضلع يذهب كسرة. هنا نار قلبي ما تطفيها الدموع ولا يبردها النعو دق الجموع والله بالمدينة ضلع وبكربلاء ضلوع ضاحت. Well, he says that there is one ضلع in Medina, but there are multiple ribs in Karbala. There are multiple ribs that Fatima weeps over in Karbala and her daughter Zainab. They say that on the night after the death of the Imam, Zainab walked out looking, trying to collect the women and children. There were two positions that Zainab wept over. The one when she looked for Al-Rabab, Maulana Al-Rabab, the mother of the infant, was not found. She could not find her. When she walked out, she saw that Al-Rabab. She heard her crying. She came to her. She says, Al-Rabab, why are you here? She says, Maulati Zainab, when I had water, I felt like I had to breastfeed. So I came to my baby to want to breastfeed my baby. And here he is cut from his throat. His head is removed from his body. Sa'ad Allah qalbaki ya Rabab. Maulana Al-Rabab has a specific position. Al-Rabi' took a specific place within the hearts of the Ahlul Bayt. Imam Zain al-Abidin, whenever someone comes from Kufa, he says to him, Ma sana'a Harmala, what has happened to Harmala? Harmala is the one who killed the infant. He left a pain within the heart of the Ahlul Bayt. He says, Ma sana'a Harmala. He says, Mawlai hayyu yurzaq. He says, Allahumma adhiq Harmala harrul hadid. He decapitated, he killed the infant. Oh Allah, let him taste the heat of the blade. مولانا شنو من طفل عدى الحسين بأبي وأمي ساعد الله قلب الرباب. That is one incident that shook Zainab. The other incident, Maulana, was she went to the body of her brother. Maulana, what was the body of Al-Hussein like? Keep in mind, brothers and sisters, that Imam Al-Hussein, according to Imam Zain al-Abidin, had 1900 jaraha, 1,900 wounds. The man asks Imam Zain al-Abidin, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, a body cannot withstand this many wounds. He says, Bala, Bala, كانت الطعنة فوق الطعنة والضربة فوق الضربة. It was one strike over the other and one stab over the other. Maulana, when Zainab came to him, she saw him without a head, without clothes, without his arms. By the way, Imam al-Hussein, not only did they cut his pinky, they cut his right and his left arm to try to get to his clothes, Maulana. However, we see, what does Sayyidah Zainab say? She comes, she places him on her lap. She lifts him to the heavens and she says, Allahumma taqabbal minna hada al-qurban. Oh Allah, accept from us this qurban. Then she turns around. Where does she turn? Maulana, when we're in pain, what do we say? Mom, right? That's what we call for. Sayyidah Zainab called for two individuals. The first one, she says, Boo ya Ali, ajab li Hussein mayit. You are Ali, why didn't you come help us? Ali بويا عجب لحسين ميت تدري بيوم طاح الأرض ميت عاد بالسلف لو مات ميت السلف يفزع وانا من فزع لي. Nobody came to me, oh my father. Then she turns and she says, سلام الله عليك يا أمي يا فاطمة. تقولها يما الحسن يما تعالي. She calls upon her mother. يما الحسن يما تعالي وشوفي كربلاء ايش سوت بحالي. Come and see what Karbala has done to me. I'm the only one that's left. أنا بقيت وحيدي وقت وحيدة زينب. مولانا, the spirit of Sayyidah Zainab answers her. What does it tell her? تقولها مو بعيدة أنا يمك يا زينب مو بعيدة. يا يما أنا يمك مو بعيدة أنا شفت حسين من حزة وريدة. يا يما أنا 3 أيام ساكن البيت. أنا يوم انهض وادور اصبعيده ويوم انهض وادور جف عضيده. رحم الضائعة بعدك ضاع. فرج عنا يا الله بحوائجنا شافي مرضانا. اللهم بنبيك نبي الرحمة وأهل بيته الأطهار. اللهم بالحسين الوجيه وجده وأبيه وأمه وأخيه والتسعة المعصومين من بنيه. اللهم عجل فرج القائم من آل محمد. اللهم عجل لنا ظهوره يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اكشف هذه الغمة عن هذه الأمة بحضوره وعجل لنا ظهوره. اللهم شافي كل مريض لا سيما المنظورين. فك كل أسير لا سيما المعينين. اللهم فرج عن إخواننا في فلسطين على الأعداء الباغين. اللهم خصهم أنت يا أرحم الراحمين بالرحمة منك. اللهم شيعة أمير المؤمنين أموات الحاضرين الباذلين، شيعة علي بن أبي طالب، شيعة الحسين، اللهم بلغ الجميع ثواب الفاتحة. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. Are we still live or are we cut? You cut the feed?